Every year, 6 million people walk up to the Roman Colosseum, hold up their phones, and take the same photograph. Sunlight pouring through broken arches, exposed brick corridors stacked like the ribs of some colossal fossil. They look down into that ruined pit, and they think they understand what they're seeing. An old stadium, a broken floor, the skeleton of an ancient entertainment complex. They are wrong. What they're actually staring at is the bottom of a lake. Not a metaphorical lake, not a poetic flourish, a real body of water that existed on that exact patch of earth before the first stone of the Colosseum was ever cut. A body of water that Roman engineers spent a decade learning to weaponize, and a body of water that, right now, at this very moment, is pushing upward through the bedrock beneath those tourist feet with enough pressure that electric pumps run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to keep it from swallowing the underground chambers whole. The Colosseum was not built next to a lake. It was not built near a lake. It was built on a lake, from a lake, and as a lake. And by the time you understand why, you will never look at those crumbling walls the same way again. Because the floor everyone thinks is missing, it's not missing. It drowned. Here is the case file. Rome, 64 AD, July. The city is a tinderbox. 1 million residents crammed into a maze of timber-framed apartment blocks stacked 6 stories high, separated by alleys narrow enough to touch both walls with outstretched arms. And on the night of July 18th, something ignites near the Circus Maximus. The fire burns for 6 days. It consumes 10 of Rome's 14 districts. Tens of thousands are left homeless. The charred remains of the city center look like a war zone because, functionally, that's what they are. And Emperor Nero sees opportunity. Within months of the ashes cooling, Nero begins the most audacious private construction project in Roman history. He seizes roughly 300 acres of freshly scorched city. Land that had belonged to ordinary Roman citizens, temples, markets, entire neighborhoods, and he announces the construction of his Domus Aurea, the Golden House. A palatial compound so vast it would sprawl across 3 of Rome's 7 hills, the Palatine, the Esquiline, and the Caelian. But the centerpiece wasn't a building, it was water. In the natural valley between those 3 hills, a low, marshy depression where groundwater had always pooled, Nero's engineers excavated a massive artificial lake. The Romans called it the Stagnum Neronis, Nero's lake. It was surrounded by colonnades designed to simulate a miniature coastline, flanked by pavilions and terraced gardens, all engineered to give the emperor the impression that he owned a private seaside resort in the geographic center of Rome. At the entrance to the complex, Nero erected a bronze statue of himself, the Colossus Neronis, standing over 100 feet tall, modeled after the Colossus of Rhodes. That statue would outlast Nero, outlast the lake, and eventually lend its name to the building that replaced both of them. The Colosseum isn't named for its size. It's named for a dead tyrant's vanity sculpture. One man's swimming pool and one man's self-portrait sat on the graves of 250,000 displaced citizens. Now, the popular version of this story, the one you absorbed in school, goes like this. Nero fiddled while Rome burned, probably started the fire himself to clear the land, and was a cackling lunatic. That narrative is seductive. It's also a political hit job. The fiddling detail was invented by historians writing decades later under the patronage of the Flavian dynasty, the family that overthrew Nero and needed to justify their coup. The fiddle didn't even exist as an instrument in first-century Rome. Nero likely played the kithara, and whether he played it during the fire or not is historically unverifiable. What is verifiable, through archaeological core samples pulled from the valley floor and geological surveys mapping the water table, is the ground itself. The depression between those 3 hills was never dry. It was a natural collection basin for runoff and groundwater, fed by underground springs connected to the broader hydrology of the Tiber watershed. Nero didn't create a lake from nothing. He formalized what the earth was already doing. And that matters. Because what came next is the most expensive act of political revenge in the ancient world. Nero dies in 68 AD. A civil war erupts. When the dust settles, a general named Vespasian takes the throne and founds the Flavian dynasty. His first major act? Draining Nero's lake. Not just draining it, erasing it. Vespasian orders the construction of a massive public amphitheatre, the largest ever built, directly on top of the Stagnum Neronis. The symbolism is surgical. Where a tyrant once hoarded a private ocean, the people of Rome will now gather by the tens of thousands. The Flavian Amphitheatre, what we call the Colosseum, is not merely a stadium. It's a headstone on a dictator's grave, carved from travertine limestone and volcanic concrete, pressed into the same waterlogged soil that Nero once claimed as his personal shoreline. And the concrete itself tells a story. Roman opus caementicium was not the gray slurry we pour from mixer trucks today. It was a composite of lime, volcanic ash called pozzolana, harvested from the slopes near Mount Vesuvius, and carefully graded aggregate. When pozzolana reacts with lime and water, it triggers a chemical process that produces crystalline structures called tobermerite. These crystals don't just harden, they grow. Over decades, over centuries. Recent material science studies have found that Roman concrete actually becomes stronger with age, and can even seal its own cracks, a property modern engineers call self-healing. The Colosseum's foundations were engineered with heavier, denser concrete at the base and progressively lighter aggregate in the upper tiers, distributing the structure's weight like a geological formation rather than a building. This is the material Vespasian used to cap a lake. Concrete that gets stronger the longer water touches it. Concrete designed for the fight it was about to have. But here's the detail that changes everything. Vespasian didn't disconnect the plumbing. The Aqua Claudia, one of Rome's 11 major aqueducts, had a branch line, the Arcus Neroniani, the Neronian arches, originally engineered to deliver water to Nero's lake. When the Colosseum rose on the same footprint, that branch line was not demolished. It was repurposed, redirected, hardwired into the amphitheater's foundations like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. And on opening day, they fired it. 80 AD, Emperor Titus, Vespasian's son, inaugurates the Colosseum with 100 consecutive days of games. The numbers are staggering even by Roman standards. Ancient sources record over 9,000 animals slaughtered during the festivities. Lions, elephants, bears, ostriches, crocodiles, pulled from every corner of the empire and funneled into the arena like biological ammunition. Gladiatorial combat runs from dawn to dusk. Condemned criminals are executed in theatrical reenactments of myths. Above the crowd, the velarium, a massive, retractable canvas awning, stretches across the open top of the amphitheater like the sail of a warship turned horizontal. 240 wooden masts line the building's upper rim, threaded through stone corbels, anchored to bollards outside the walls by ropes under enormous tension. The system is so complex that operating it requires not laborers, but sailors, a permanent detachment from the classis missinensis, the Roman Navy's fleet at Misenum. These are men trained to handle rigging on open water, repurposed to manage canvas over a stone arena. The crowd sits 50,000 strong, shielded from the Mediterranean sun by a technology borrowed from the sea, watching a spectacle that is about to bring the sea to them. But the headliner isn't blood. It's water. The poet Martial, who was there, describes it in his Liber Spectaculorum. The historian Cassius Dio corroborates it decades later. At some point during the inaugural games, the arena floor, a wooden platform stretched across the basin, is removed. And the basin fills. Water surges through underground channels fed by the Arcus Neroniani, rising until it reaches a depth of roughly 1.5 meters, about 5 feet. Enough to float ships. Not toy boats, not symbolic props, Actual shallow-drafted warships, crewed by condemned prisoners, smashing into each other in a choreographed reenactment of a historical naval engagement. The Romans called it a Naumachia, a mock sea battle, staged inside a landlocked stone amphitheater in the center of a city 15 miles from the nearest coastline. To understand how insane this is, translate it into modern terms. The Colosseum's arena floor measured roughly 83 meters by 48 meters, smaller than a professional soccer pitch. Filling that basin to a depth of 5 feet required an estimated 5,000 to 5,500 cubic meters of water. That's approximately 1.3 million gallons. Picture an Olympic swimming pool. Now picture filling more than 2 of them, pouring the contents into a stone bowl surrounded by 50,000 screaming spectators, launching warships into it, and then, because there are gladiatorial fights scheduled for the afternoon, draining the entire thing dry within a few hours, using only gravity and stone pipes. This wasn't engineering. This was controlled insanity executed with slide rule precision. The waterproofing alone required opus signinum, a specialized morite mortar made from crushed terracotta mixed with lime, creating a hydraulic seal that could hold water against stone. The drainage system relied on 4 primary culverts positioned at the cardinal axes of the ellipse, channeling water downhill through an underground network that eventually connected to Rome's main sewer system. The fill rate was governed by the aqueduct's flow capacity. The drain rate was governed by gravity, and the entire operation, fill, fight, drain, had to happen fast enough to keep the schedule of a 100-day festival on track. Modern hydraulic engineers who've modeled this system describe it with a word that rarely appears in academic papers: audacious. But here's the part of the case file that nobody talks about. The lake died, and one man killed it. Emperor Domitian takes power in 81 AD, 1 year after the Colosseum opens, and almost immediately he makes a decision that will permanently alter the building's identity. He orders the construction of a permanent underground complex directly beneath the arena floor. The Romans called it the hypogeum, from the Greek for under the earth. 2 levels deep, a labyrinth of stone corridors, holding cells, animal pens, and mechanical infrastructure so sophisticated it would not be matched in complexity until the industrial age. 80 vertical shafts, each fitted with rope and pulley elevators called pegmata, capable of lifting animals, scenery, and even combatants through trap doors in the arena floor. 32 animal pens, linked by tunnels to external staging areas where handlers could manage the flow of exotic beasts without exposing them to the crowd prematurely. Wooden ramps, counterweight systems, a backstage operation for death, running on engineering that wouldn't look out of place in a modern theater's fly system. The moment those stone walls went up, the Colosseum could never be flooded again. It's tempting to assume this was just an upgrade, the Romans getting bored with naval battles and wanting more variety. Some historians have suggested a political motive. Domitian, perpetually insecure, was jealous of his brother Titus's wildly popular inaugural games and wanted to erase their signature spectacle from the repertoire. Others point to practical logistics. Maintaining the waterproofing was expensive, the fill and drain cycle disrupted the event calendar, and the animal elevator system was simply a better use of the underground space. But ground-penetrating radar surveys and 3-dimensional photogrammetry of the hypogeum tell a more nuanced story. The construction wasn't laid on virgin ground. It was retrofitted into the existing water infrastructure. The original drainage channels, the same channels that once emptied Nero's lake, the same channels that drained the Naumachia water, are still down there, entombed beneath the hypogeum's floor slabs like fossils sealed in sedimentary rock. Domitian didn't destroy the plumbing. He paved over it, and the water noticed. The groundwater that had pooled in that valley since before Rome existed, the same water table that Nero tapped for his Stagnum, the same water that Vespasian's engineers fought to contain during construction, never stopped rising. It pushed against the hypogeum's foundations the way a river pushes against a dam. Slowly, patiently, Century after century, long after the last gladiator fell, long after the last emperor sat in the imperial box, the water kept climbing. When 19th century archaeologists began serious excavation of the Colosseum's underground levels, they hit water almost immediately. The campaigns of 1813 and 1874 were repeatedly halted by flooding so severe that workers couldn't stand in the tunnels. Excavators would clear a corridor, return the next morning, and find it submerged to knee level. They pumped it out by hand. It came back. They diverted it with temporary channels. It found new paths. The valley remembered what it was before the Romans ever touched it, and it had no interest in cooperating with Victorian archaeologists carrying oil lamps and shovels. For most of the 1800s, the hypogeum sat buried under roughly 40 feet of accumulated soil, debris, and, critically, standing water. The underground complex that Domitian built to replace the lake had become a lake itself. The irony is so precise, it feels engineered. It wasn't until the 1930s, under Mussolini's regime, that the hypogeum was fully cleared. Mussolini, obsessed with reclaiming Rome's imperial glory as political theater for his fascist state, ordered industrial-scale drainage of the underground chambers. Heavy pumping infrastructure was installed, diesel-powered at first, later electric. Thousands of tons of sediment were removed by hand and rail cart, and when the water finally receded, what emerged was a ghost city beneath a ghost arena. Corridors still scored with pulley grooves, elevator shafts still framed in tufa blocks, animal pens still stained with calcium deposits from centuries of standing water. The archaeologists had drained a lake to find a machine. And those pumps have never been turned off. Not during World War II, when Allied bombs struck nearby. Not during the economic crises of the post-war years. Not during the millions of tourist visits that followed. They run today, right now, as you're hearing this. Because the water beneath the Colosseum is not a historical curiosity. It is a present-tense engineering problem. The lake is not a memory. It's a tenant who refuses to leave. And that brings us to the part of this case file that reads like science fiction. In May 2021, the Italian government announced a project that would have made Vespasian raise an eyebrow. They're rebuilding the Colosseum's arena floor. Not a replica elsewhere, not a museum exhibit. The actual floor, inside the actual Colosseum, over the actual hypogeum, above the actual groundwater that has been trying to reclaim this building for 2,000 years. The contract, valued at 18.5 million euros, was awarded to Milan Ingegneria, a Milanese engineering firm working alongside the architecture studio Labix and architect Fabio Fumagalli. The design is aggressively modern. The new floor will be constructed from carbon fiber slats, finished in sustainably harvested Accoya wood, a modified timber engineered for extreme moisture resistance. The entire system is remote-controlled. Individual slats can rotate and shift, allowing the hypogeum below to be covered or uncovered depending on ventilation needs, archaeological access, or visitor experience. It is fully reversible, meaning it can be removed without leaving a single permanent mark on the ancient structure. Preservationists immediately lost their minds. Disneyfication, they called it. Conspiracy theories sprouted about billionaire-funded private concerts and corporate events staged inside the arena. The Italian cultural minister had to publicly clarify that the floor was intended to restore the visitor experience to something approximating what a Roman spectator would have seen, a complete arena, not a gutted ruin, while simultaneously protecting the hypogeum from the elements. But buried in the engineering specifications is a detail that connects this 21st century project to every chapter of this story. The single greatest technical challenge facing Milan Ingegneria is not load-bearing capacity. It's not visitor safety. It's not UV resistance or seismic stability, though all of those matter. It's moisture, the groundwater. The same groundwater, the water that filled Nero's pleasure lake, the water that the Aqua Claudia once supplemented for Naumachia spectacles. The water that flooded the hypogeum for a century and a half before Mussolini's pumps pushed it back. The carbon fiber slats must resist it. The Akoya wood was specifically chosen for its ability to withstand it. The ventilation system is designed, in part, to manage the humidity it generates. 20 centuries of human civilization, the most advanced construction materials on Earth, and the fundamental engineering problem has not changed by a single variable. How do you put a floor on top of a lake? Stand back for a moment and look at the full timeline. One patch of marshy ground in a Roman valley. In sequence, it has been a residential neighborhood, a fire zone, a dictator's private lake, a public slaughter arena, an inland sea for staged naval warfare, an underground maze for animal elevators, a flooded ruin entombed under 40 feet of earth, and now an €18.5 million carbon fiber engineering puzzle. Empires rose and collapsed on this ground. Technologies evolved from volcanic ash concrete to self-healing Roman mortar to 21st century carbon composites. Political systems cycled from tyranny to republic to empire to fascism to democracy. Languages shifted from Latin to Italian. Religions turned from Jupiter to Christ. The city around the Colosseum burned, was sacked by Visigoths, was shaken by earthquakes, was stripped for building materials by medieval contractors who treated it like a quarry. And through every single transition, every fire, every war, every plague, every excavation, every tourist season, the water table beneath that valley floor has not moved. Not 1 inch. It does not care about emperors. It has no opinion on carbon fiber. It does not know what a tourist is. It was there before Nero. It will be there after the last selfie stick is manufactured. There is something unsettling about that, and something quietly magnificent. We like to believe that engineering conquers nature, that concrete tames rivers, that pumps defeat geology. But this single site, this one marshy dip in a Roman valley, has forced every civilization that touched it to negotiate with the same underground pressure. The Julio-Claudians negotiated. The Flavians negotiated. Mussolini negotiated. Milan Ingegneria is negotiating right now. The tools change. The ambition doesn't. The water doesn't either. So the next time you see a photograph of the Colosseum, that iconic shot of sunlight cutting through the arches, the exposed corridors of the hypogeum laid bare like an architectural autopsy, remember what you're actually looking at. Not a ruin, not a stadium, not even an arena. A 2,000-year argument between human engineering and groundwater. And the groundwater is winning on points. Now here's what I want to know from you, and be specific. If you could witness one spectacle from the original Colosseum, which would it be? A gladiatorial bout, with the crowd so close you could feel the sand kicked onto your sandals? An exotic animal hunt, with a rhinoceros rising through a trap door into blinding daylight? Or a full-scale Naumachia, warships crashing on an artificial sea inside a stone amphitheater in the middle of a city? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this case file changed the way you see the Colosseum, you know what to do.